Welcome back to another edition of Rock Forever. We've got a very special guest and a very special album we're talking about today. He, of course, is the co-founder, bassist, songwriter extraordinaire of the original Alice Cooper Band. Please welcome Dennis Dunaway. Greetings, Dennis. How are you?
Hi, Jay. How are you?
Doing-
I'm just doing fine. I mean, how can we all be doing at this point in this?
I know we
strange new
got to bear
world?
through. If it's the end of the world, we got to go down in flames. You know.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting used to being at home. You know, I'm doing like bass solos for the house plants and stuff like that.
I know there's more touring musicians that probably their families are tired of them at this point. They're like, Dad, are you going on the road or what? You know?
Yeah, right.
When's the next show? When you leave, man? I've never seen this much of you before.
Exactly. And when things do open back up, everybody in the world is going to be on the road.
Yeah, there will be a new a new day and time. Everywhere there's electricity, somebody will be performing.
Exactly.
So, Dennis, obviously, you go back as an original school friend of our boy Vince, aka Alice Cooper, and Glenn. You three go all the way back to '64, playing, in school, doing your kind of Beatles tribute and all that. I mean, everybody was moved back in '64 with the boys from Liverpool. But talk about this long, incredible journey it's been this many years later. Boy, that's going on. My gosh, what is that? That's coming up on 60 years come 2024 that you've been collaborating around, Vince. It's amazing to see this come full circle. But I know you guys came up in Phoenix, but then moved out to LA to try and stake your claim. And tell us about when you listened to the first two Alice Cooper albums that you made out here with, Frank Zappa's label. What are your memories when you hear those albums of, where you guys were at that point?
Well, you know, the difference between a musician thinking about his own album and a fan thinking about that same album is that, you know, there were a lot of things going on in the lives of the band. I mean, we played a lot in LA, but just because of the way we dressed and our image and everything, we were kind of the brunt of a lot of jokes in Los Angeles. You know, we'd go walking down the street in our stage clothes and but you know, we worked a lot more than most of the bands that were out there. There were thousands of musicians that all migrated to LA at the time. So that all has to do with when I think about the album, I think of all of that stuff too, the GTOs, Frank Zappa, the Doors, and all of these different bands that were our friends and we were hanging out with and all of that. But the recording itself, you know, I mean, I wish we had known more about what we were doing when we did the album, but my heart is with Pretties for You because it was an artistic statement that I don't think will ever be made again. The second album was more of a struggle because we weren't really ready to go back in the studio. We didn't have a rehearsal place and we kind of didn't, we only had like maybe a third of the amount of songs together that we would have liked to have had. So that one was, that one is, I think of that when I think of that album as well. So it's hard for me to just put the records on and really just listen to it just for the music like other people would.
Yeah, well, I know being from Phoenix, LA was the natural spot, just 6 hour drive away. But obviously you guys had the feeling that there was probably another scene somewhere else that really would react to what you were doing, or you guys would fit in well. I know Alice said that LA was on the wrong drugs. Everybody was on acid and you guys were drinking beer. So it was really I guess, head to the Motor City. Talk about, the discussions, between the members, like, we want to go to Detroit, and was it all for one and one for all? Anybody dragging their feet? What was the discussions like back then?
Well, the discussions were, we've done 2 albums and, and they didn't set the world on fire like we thought that they would. So we were kind of up to bat, hoping that we could get a hit. And Detroit kind of called us. We were living out of suitcases for a while after we left LA, and most of the jobs that we got were in the Midwest. I mean, we were playing anywhere we could get a gig. If it was in Seattle, we played there, and if the next gig was in Nashville, we played there. It was and a lot of times it was a struggle to get to the next place on in time for the gig, but that's what we did. But luckily, the majority of our gigs started happening in the Midwest around Detroit, mostly because of Leo Fenn, our road manager, who worked for a booking agency that got a lot of gigs for bands, Susie Quattro and Cradle and Pleasure Seekers and lots of other Detroit bands. But that also spilled over into Canada. So Canada and Michigan, Ohio, the whole Midwest was where we got most of our gigs. So we started almost living at this dive hotel outside of Detroit at the time.
Yeah, we've interviewed Michael Quattro before. Was he one of the booking agents or the promoters, I guess, at the
Yeah,
time, bringing you guys in?
yeah. Michael, they call a lot of his friends called him Mickey back then, but he was a kind of a child prodigy who won a Hammond organ on the Ted Mack Amateur Hour. I don't know if anybody goes back that far, but it was a TV show that had a talent contest, and the
It
winner
was
got
the Star Search of the day.
right. And but he would put together all of these different various concerts and festivals around the Detroit area, and it would be all of the Detroit bands. And the following for local bands was very strong in Detroit. Detroiters loved their bands, and so Mickey would play. He would open the show, so he'd have his Hammond organ and he would do a set, and that would break the ice. And then all of these other bands would play. And he put on a lot of shows. He had a lot to do with us getting a lot of gigs in that area.
That's great. Well, I know things have probably changed a lot since then, but was it fairly easy to go back and forth over the Canadian border as long as you had a passport? Was it pretty simple, or any scary moments trying to get through customs?
I was just talking to our first roadie, Mike Allen, Amp Boy, uh, who is writing a book actually, and he was talking about at the border. Every time a band crossed the border, at the time there were a lot of people that didn't want to get drafted for the Vietnam War and whatever that would migrate up to Canada. And authorities kind of blamed America for drugs coming into their country. And they also didn't like that American bands were coming up there and making money and bringing it back to America, when America at the time wouldn't play Canadian bands' music on the radio station. So there was so we would cross the bridge from Detroit to Windsor, Canada, and every single time they would make us unload the entire truck, open up the backs of the amplifiers, open up the tape recorder, and have everything laying out on this icy pavement while the band would be in this big cold room in our underwear waiting. It was not fun. And then at the exchange of money, we would lose going over and then we'd lose coming back, even if it was the same day. They always took a percentage of your money to exchange it. But, Canada was a whole different world. Windsor, Canada is where our I'm 18 broke out of. CKLW, Rosalie Trombley, the girl with the golden ear, decided to start playing it, and it became a big hit because of her.
Yeah, well, I know I went to college just under Vancouver, right in the last city in, Washington State. And I used to pick up, Canadian radio stations from there all the time. And there were artists that were absolutely massive in Canada that if they crossed the border, they couldn't get arrested. No one had ever heard of them. And I know that same with Detroit and Toronto and all that, where you can beam in over the little imaginary border there, and all of a sudden, I remember ZZ Top had a song called "Heard It on the X" because down in Texas and probably even in Arizona and lower San Diego, they had like the Tijuana radio stations and stuff in Mexico where those stations started with an X, but they didn't have the FCC rules, so they could have these huge transmitters. And I remember at night you used to be able to pick up AM radio like states away, sometimes even from Mexico with the large
Right. You
transmitters.
had Wolfman Jack down there. And before that, you had, I can't remember the call letters for the station, but the Carter family made country music famous in America because that transmitter in Mexico could be heard all the way to Canada. That's how powerful the transmitter was. And CKLW was like that too. I mean, it covered the whole Midwest of America. And, at the time, in retaliation to American radio stations not playing Canadian bands, they wouldn't play American bands at the time when we put out Under My Wheels and even I'm 18. But the reason we were able to get on their station is because we had Jack Richardson, a Canadian, and Bob Ezrin, a Canadian. So we had Canadian content. And that's the only way they were able to play our songs at the time.
Yeah, I remember that being in Canada and Vancouver and everything, that a lot of the artists, the country of Canada had grants for artists. And, like you say, the Canadian content law, I believe it was up to 30% of everything broadcast had to be Canadian related or artists or produced. And, it's our little neighbor to the north, but they support their art so much more, than our country.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because at the time, of all of the anti-establishment sort of feelings that were going on in America and young people, sort of rebelling. It was in Detroit, it was all fist in the air, John Sinclair, and everything was very militant. But you cross the border into Canada and they had the same goal, but all of a sudden it was give peace a chance up there. So it was like two completely different frame of mind, but they were both fighting for the same cause.
Yeah, well, Detroit's always been such a blue collar city, with the automotive industry there and the factories. It's definitely, a different flavor, and you guys were certainly accepted there. Now we come full circle after you guys have, done so much in Detroit and so many shows over the years, and Alice always given back, to the Motor City. And here we come with an album called Detroit Stories. I know it was recorded at the Rust Belt Studio in Royal Oak. Talk about when Alice first told you about this project and what he intended to do with it.
Well, that's pretty much it. I mean, Alice called me and told me that he was going to do an album. And at the time, he hadn't come up with the title yet, but he said he wanted it to be about Detroit and asked if I had any songs that might work out for that. And we came up with uh, several ideas. Not all of them panned out, but that's how it always goes, you know. But so I would see Alice at backstage at these concerts, or I'd sit in with them once in a while or whatever. But every time we'd get together, we'd talk about these ideas that we had for how to capture the feeling of Detroit at that time. And and then you just keep working on things, and then it starts to clarify. And then, especially when Alice came up with the title, then all of a sudden things tend to fall into place at that point. But we had a lot of fun doing it. I mean, uh, Alice was born in Detroit. Neil Smith and Glenn Buxton were born in Ohio, so they had that Midwest. Uh, you know, they grew up in the Midwest. And the rest of us kind of just became Detroiters overnight, because that's where we ended up getting a farm, and we wrote Love It to Death and Killer there. And those albums were influenced by Detroit. Uh, so we felt that, well, we're close enough. We're Detroiters.
Yeah, like they say, it's not where you're from, it's where you're at, and
Yeah.
obviously you guys were embraced. And talk a little bit more about those early days, because like you say, the shows were very much a hodgepodge of different styles of music, or different levels of rock, but it all kind of made sense in that counterculture kind of attitude.
Well, as artists, we were influenced by our surroundings, and when the band lived in Hollywood, Pretty's for You was glitzy, and so when we moved to Detroit, all of a sudden, the other Detroit bands they saw what we were wearing, and they started glamming out a little bit. And we saw, that some of the ditties that we were playing weren't going to hold up if we had to follow the Stooges, which we often did, and had to open for MC5 and the Who and stuff like that. All of a sudden, we decided we've got to get an edge to our music, which is what we did, what happened there. Uh, and how do you outpower the Stooges, and how do you outpower the MC5? Well, we decided we're going to have to do something different than trying to outpower them. So, we decided to execute our singer.
There you go. Yeah, no, I mean, people love horror movies. They love, to be surprised or shocked. And, you guys were the best at it, and I know probably a lot of the early props and ideas were very primitive, but, as creatives you were, you started fleshing them out and making them look, more realistic and all that. And it's crazy that 60 years later, Alice is still employing, so many of those same effects, on stage. Now, obviously, bands like Grand Funk, which were from Flint, honorary, of course, Michiganers, were doing real well around that time. And, a lot of the bands, like you say, Iggy and the Stooges, and even MC5 to a degree, were really more kind of less than mainstream. They were kind of under the radar. And of course, Iggy was, hated, hated by many. We hear the stories of the combative, crowds and performances. And then later he becomes like the godfather of punk rock, and is considered one of the icons. It's pretty amazing how the underground becomes the norm, at some point. But the mixture, between Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, and of course Motown coming out of the city. So you have the dirt and the glamour. Detroit had a lot of soul, coming out of it. So talk about the elements that you saw coming into this album and what should be celebrated.
Well, it was all of that, but let me backtrack a little bit. We loved Iggy, and some of that reputation of him being hated, I think, was it was like Don Rickles. You know, if Don Rickles didn't insult you, you were insulted, because Iggy would dive off the stage, the crowd would part. They wouldn't catch the singer in those days. And he'd hit the stage, the floor of the place, and he'd get up and he'd walk around and pick a fight with somebody, you know, and whoever he picked a fight with had bragging rights for the next couple of weeks, you know. So I'm not sure he was really hated that much. Lester Bangs loved him and gave the Stooges great write-ups, and we didn't get such great write-ups, and he hung out with us a lot. But so all of this stuff, the, you know, SRC, Mitch Ryder, all of the various bands, and just the whole, the energy is what we tried to capture on the new album. The, you know, the raw energy, which was a little bit different than Motown. You know, Motown was, is, everything they did was amazing, but the rock era was kind of like unto itself. I'm not sure that a lot of everybody respected Motown immensely, but that wasn't at the time considered part of what was really happening in Detroit. It was more the festivals and all of these great bands, Nugent, Amp Boy Dukes, the SRC, blues band called Catfish. Detroit, you know, Mitch Ryder was always amazing live. I mean, Detroit was the band that he had at the time, and they were so tight. Every time I saw him play, I thought, oh, I don't want to follow them. So all of these elements are what we, you know, we thought, okay, well, how do you encompass all of that? Well, basically all you can do, and Alice came up with the perfect way to go about it. We're just going to tell different stories. Each song is a different story that applies to things that were going on in Detroit at that time. It ended up simple. It started out more complex, but once the focus came, then all of a sudden there was clarity to it.
Yeah, and of course Johnny B. Bedanjek is on the album. That guy must have the fountain of youth. I mean, we remember that guy banging those skins like, you know, 60 years ago. And he was even in the band The Rockets, you know, in the late 70s. And he's still bashing those drums. I mean, what can you say about Johnny B?
Well, I mean, all you have to do is hear any song that he does, and you've got that Detroit energy. I mean, it's powerful. Same with Wayne Kramer. I mean, he sounds great. He's, you know, every time I hear him, I think the guy keeps getting better. So, yeah, I mean, it's survivors, you know, and that's Detroit. It still is with the Detroit fans of that era. When those people play, it's still expected to be high energy and give it all you got. And there's a lot of great guitar players in Detroit and a lot of great musicians that still have it. You know, they still bring it.
Yeah, you know, so many of the bands, you know, we think of Kiss, you know, from, you know, New York City, but it wasn't until, you know, Detroit really embraced them that they recorded the Kiss Alive album and Cobo Hall and, you know, so much of their Detroit Rock City, the song they still open. They just open their New Year's, you know, stream with that. I mean, it's
Right.
like their greatest opener. And Jay Giles band in the 70s, if people don't know, you got to go check them out. They were one of the greatest live bands ever out of Boston, but Detroit just embraced them, and they would always record the big live album in Detroit, just like Kiss and so many other bands outside of that area. You know, what do you think it was about the audience that just really embraced a real hard rocking band?
Uh, I think it's what you said before. It's like these were people that worked on the assembly line building cars, you know, and you had to be kind of tough. And yeah, I mean, you didn't go out and drink. You didn't say, hey, you want to drink a 6-pack of beer? No, you'd say, hey, you want to pound some bitches, and stuff like that. And if a band played a ballad, there would be a long line at the men's room, because it was time for a break. So it kind of, I don't know, it was just fist in the air, and everybody full energy all the time in Detroit. And that's what they wanted, and that's what everybody wanted. So those are the bands that were kind of just like us, Detroit audience took them under their wing and brought them in. I mean, you could even tell with the radio stations. I mean, we spent a lot of time, the Alice Cooper group, driving all over the country in a station wagon, and you'd be in certain states where you'd have the radio on, and you'd keep switching stations to try to find something that everybody in the car wanted to hear. And when you got into the Midwest, you the songs were all great. You kept turning the radio up. Hey, great, turn it up. And then you get to a point where you'd say, wow, we better turn it back down or we're going to blow a speaker. And all of that stuff would jump right out of the dashboard. And that was a big influence on us because we heard the energy on the radio stations. And and then we thought, okay, well, we need something. We need a hit single. We had the reputation at the time. We had done the work with Frank Zappa. We had the chicken incident with John Lennon up in Canada. So we had the reputation, but we didn't have a hit single, which was what made that the promoters were hit single driven. I mean, even the Mothers of Invention didn't make nearly as much money as other bands because they didn't have a hit single. So so we would hear, and this was after Jack Richardson, the producer of the Guess Who, had kind of kicked down the doors to America for our Canadian bands by getting hits with the Guess Who. And those songs would jump right out of the dashboard. We said, we need a producer like that. So we started pursuing Jack Richardson, who basically was concerned about our reputation with the chicken thing, right? And but we kept hounding him. If he went to Chicago to record, there would be messages waiting at his hotel room and at the studio and everything. And so finally, he had this young kid who had never produced anything, Bob Ezrin, and he said, Bob, go listen to these guys. Then we can say we passed and maybe end these phone calls, right? So Bob Ezrin went to New York City, Max's Kansas City, and saw us play there. And then because of that connection, Warner Brothers, who had passed on us before back in the Hollywood days, now they said, okay, we'll sign you guys, but we have to guarantee a hit. And you're telling us you want to use a producer that has never done an album. We'll only sign you if Jack Richardson is there for the first 2 albums to make sure you get a hit and an album under budget. So, and that all happened. Bob Ezrin came to Detroit after we had gotten the Warner Brothers contract and showed up. And, now we've got a new guy, a kid. I mean, he looked younger than he actually was at the time. And he's going to come into our sacred rehearsal room where, it was fiery. Everybody was very passionate about our ideas. And we sounded like we were yelling at each other all the time, but we were really all on the same page as to what each person thinks is going to make it better. It was never somebody thinking they were, taking anything personally. But it sounded like that. Most people kept their distance from the rehearsal room. Now we've got this kid coming in and he's going to start telling us what to do. What? So, but that's why we brought him in. We knew that we had a weak link. We needed a hit single. So the first thing Bob Ezrin did the very first thing, we had breakfast together, and he said, okay, you guys have this stage show that's really something new, but I've listened to your records and it's not there. It's not in the grooves. People listen to your records and your stage show is something completely different. We've got to get what you do on stage into the grooves. And by then we had already figured that out too. You know, the first two albums weren't putting any food on the table. So we decided to write songs that were more relatable and write songs that supported the dark image of Alice. And so we had already come up with a lot of stuff on our own. But having Bob there, he said, okay, the first thing we're going to do is that song, I'm Edgy. And we're like, you mean I'm 18? And he's like, okay. So he took the song. We started out with a long, moody, bluesy kind of intro that built up, and then the song came in, right? So Bob's like, okay, let's get rid of that intro. We're like, wait a minute, we love the intro. It's like, nope, get rid of the intro. We're going to just start with the chorus only instrumentally and go right into the verse. We're like, okay. By the end, within like maybe 3 or 4 hours, I'm 18 as it was recorded, that arrangement was finished. And we're like, well, not only does he know how to arrange a song to be an AM single, he also works really efficiently and really fast. And also the other thing that I love about Bob to this day is that he would let Neil and I experiment to the moon and back. You know, he wouldn't say, you guys are disrupting everything by all of your trying every part in the world before you decide what you're going to do there. He understood that that's how we got to where we would wind up, you know, and Neil and I would you know, just try everything before we would decide which part we wanted to do on each part of every song. So that was all good too. That was Detroit. That was us in a rehearsal room, 10 hours a day with Bob Ezrin.
Well, it's absolutely amazing that, you know, the relationship with Bob continues to this day. You know, what do you think it is? Obviously, you guys had success together, but what do you think it is that, you know, clicks that Bob and Alice and, you know, you guys on so many projects are continuing to be collaborators in the 2020s?
Well, I love hanging out with Bob socially, you know, so we're friends, for one thing. And so are all of the members of the Alice Cooper group. That kind of has always been a priority for us, you know. You know, we've never had to work with anybody we didn't like, really. So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is he's just there's certain things that he does that's brilliant, and it's like Jack Richardson in that he will deliver an album under budget, and he will, you know, back then, if the style was still what radio stations played, get a hit. So you know, like for instance, on the last album, on the Paranormal album, we were in Detroit. We were in Nashville, and the guitar players both were playing two different parts, and we had decided that we wanted to record Fireball all live. And the simplest part of the song, they both would play it different than each other, and there would be a clash. And we could have just punched it in, but so we did another take, and this time they both reversed what they were doing. Finally, Bob Ezrin, who was playing Hammond organ live with us in the studio, got up and came over and picked up a guitar and showed them the part that I had written transposed to a different key. And then we got the take. I mean, I didn't even know Bob played guitar. And stuff like that. I mean, he's all of a sudden, boom, you go, wow, you know? So it's like that. He's a lot of fun to work with, but he also knows when to crack the whip, just like Jack Richardson, and get things done, you know. Where me, I would be pondering things and weighing all of the options to before I decided what I thought we should do. Bob, boom, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, like they say, don't bore us, get to the chorus. You
Exactly.
gotta hit them over the head, especially with AM radio. I mean, you got 2 minutes to form some ear candy they want to hear again and again, and run out and buy the 7-inch piece of plastic.
Right. Well, in the old days, they would say for a band that was trying to get their first record deal, and you wanted to impress, you know, the A&R guy, uh, give them a cassette tape and with a song, with your best song for the opener, and you better get to the chorus before his telephone rings. because they had so many piles of cassettes in those days, uh, so that was the other reason that we started I'm 18 with the chorus. Even though it didn't have the singing, boom, we're there. No long extended. Now the other version we played on stage a lot with the organ intro and stuff, that was more of what AM or FM radio wanted at the time. They wanted the sprawling Inagata Davida and Roundabout and Halo Flies, songs like that. Where AM radio, you better get out of here in 3.5 minutes or we're going to play somebody else's record.
Yeah, you could have the album cut, you could have the live version, but the single version, like I say, back then, it's hard to imagine AM radio was such a force now because it's only talk radio, but AM radio was it. FM was loose. They're going to play album cuts, but they don't have that consistency. The record companies wanted consistency. That hook played so many times a day on so many stations for people to go out and buy it, and it was, a different era, that's for sure.
Well, the hook is what we aimed for. We had all of our, we, we figured that if we had a hit single, then we could get people to listen to our artistic side. But for a hit single, you needed a hook. And what is a hook? A hook is something that if you hear the song on the radio and they don't announce who the band is, you want people to have it stuck in their head so they can go to the record store and say, hey, I heard this song on the radio, I'm 18. And how did they know it was I'm 18, or how did they know it was School's Out? Because the hook stuck in their head after one play. That's where I thought, I've always felt that it was a little bit of a disadvantage on Under My Wheels. It's like that song at the time, if it was called The Telephone Is Ringing, I think it would have been a better hook.
Yeah, it's amazing to go back and look at the catalog. You guys had, I call it the Grand Slam, with Love It to Death and Killer and School's Out and Billion Dollar Babies. It was certainly a 1, 2, 3, 4 punch, that was heard to this day. That's what's so amazing, is the timeless effect of music. You can put on any of those albums, hear your favorite songs, and yeah, of course, recording has advanced, and technology has improved and all that. But there was a feeling, back when you recorded those albums. Did Was there a lot of overdubs, or did Bob really try and go for a live feel?
No, what we would do is, with few exceptions, we would go in, and this was standard. We would go into the studio and get the drum sound, which would take hours. And then we would get the bass pretty quickly because it's much easier. And then And then we would get the guitar sounds or keyboards if that was one of the basic instruments. And we would go for what they called a bed track, which basically you're hoping that you can get the drums and bass. And if you get either of the guitar parts, as up to the level that you're going for, then great. But otherwise, if we just get the drums to be perfect all the way through, we can overdub everything else. Now, most of the time we got bass and drums, and then we started with the guitar. So, and almost every guitar part, and I don't know if this is really evident when you listen to those albums, but almost every guitar part is doubled. So if Michael played his part, then he would get it all the way through, and then he would record the exact same part all the way through again. Then Glenn would do his part and then double that. And a lot of those things were, whether they used it or not, you know. So when they got into to do the mix, they had that option. And that's how you would get that kind of ringy sound, full sound on the guitar. And we would do with the vocals too, like Still Got a Long Way to Go. Those vocals took forever. I mean, I was sitting out in the hallway taking a break while Michael and Alice were in the studio singing those harmonies over and over and over. And by the end of the night, I thought, oh my God, I never want to hear this song again. but you wait a couple days and then you hear it in the mix and you go, wow, yeah, that was worth it. I think one of the only songs we did where Alice sang live, where we actually recorded everything live exactly the way I wrote it, was Black Juju. We did a take, and then Michael said, there's one dissonant organ part in there that I didn't mean to play, so let's do it again. And we recorded the song again, and then we compared the two takes, and they sounded identical except for that dissonant note. And then we all decided we liked the one with the dissonant note. So we basically got it in one take. But that was Alice's vocals singing along with the band, which I kind of wish we would have done more often. But that was the style of recording technique then. It was state of the art methods.
Yeah, well, that's what we love so much about, the music from the 70s and, before things got real digital and computers and all that, where they're just copying and pasting in, choruses. It's the little imperfections, it's a little tempo change or a little note out of place, which makes that Rolling Stones song or that that great record you're listening to sound much more real.
Right. The problem is you have the editing capabilities to fix everything, perfect everything. And, back then, especially with Jack Richardson around, who was a bass player himself, if I had one bass note that I didn't like, he would make me record the whole song again. He wouldn't punch in that note. Sometimes if Jack would take a bathroom break, Bob would say, okay, hurry up, let's go in and fix that note. But, so you could punch in and you could do this and that. But with today's methods, a lot of times what I will do is if I've recorded something and then the bass drum and the bass don't match up right on the downbeat, I will correct that. And the next note, okay, that's a hair off too. And the next note is a hair off too. Well, leave those alone because you're going to suck the feel out of the song,
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of people that love the old analog sound and try and go for something more real, because it's definitely one of the complaints about a lot of today's music. It is too processed, too clinically perfect, and once you polish everything, you take all the edges out of it.
Right. It's all they're tools really. And the per, trying to make recordings perfect uh, was what we tried to do, but we knew that it couldn't be perfect. Now you can make it perfect, and that's where that comes in, where you kill the feel. Now, uh, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band record most of their songs with Bruce singing lead. They go for live takes, so you can still, the feel is in their music. Uh, but also with the analog, there was that blend. Digital tends to isolate each instrument, so you're hearing everybody playing together, but you can hear the bass almost individually. You can hear the drums almost individually, where, say, like a digital version of an early Rolling Stones album, it doesn't sound right because the vinyl mix, and because of the nature of vinyl compared to digital recording, uh, there was a blend. It sounded like the band was in a room and the whole room is throbbing with the feel of the song. Uh, so, I prefer listening to, a lot of music on vinyl because of that.
Well, so much to celebrate here. The new album, Detroit Stories, of course. Alice with his Merry Men of Michigan based artists, including our friend Dennis here, but so much more as we continue to celebrate the original Alice Cooper group. Of course, Neil Smith, Michael Bruce, and rest in peace, Glenn Buxton. You have the super duper Alice Cooper documentary. Go check that out if you haven't already seen it. Amazing story of the rise and development of the band. And of course, you got to get Dennis's book, Snakes, Guillotines, Electric Chairs, My Adventure in the Alice Cooper Group. What amazing treasures that you've given us, and the gifts keep on giving.
Well, that's the magic of music. It really is. Think of how many songs you have in your head, whether you like them or not. Yummy, yummy, yummy. I got love in my, whatever it is. You've got all of these melodies in your head, and most of us learn the ABCs with a song. So there's something about music, but it also, the music that you love takes you back to a time. If you hear a certain song and you think of a certain girl and a certain date or whatever, and it really is a magical thing. It's my life, and I love making music, but also there's a lot of people out there that just love listening to it. Thank God. Music is there when you have the blues. You can listen to the blues and suddenly you have company. If you're celebrating, you can play, a song of celebration, or you can just listen to a song and all of a sudden good memories start flooding back. It's all great.